Our first seminar speaker for today is Dr. Frank Porreca. He's the Associate Department Head and Professor in the Department of Pharmacology. He also holds joint appointments in anesthesiology, cancer biology, and neuroscience. Dr. Porreca is one of our ASPET mentors. So for those of you who don't know, UBRP has a grant from the American Society for Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics, which we refer to as ASPET, which funds 5 of our students every summer to do work with an ASPET mentor. And Dr. Porreca is one of those. And as I was preparing for this introduction, I looked up a bunch of different information on Dr. Porreca. And the thing that really struck me was he literally has co-authored hundreds of publications, hundreds. And according to ASPET, he is one of the 10 most cited pharmacologists in the world. And for the fun of it, I decided to go on Google Scholar and check out his publications. And on Google Scholar, as of this morning, Dr. Porreca had 50,493 citations of his work. So he is a very influential guy in the field. So Dr. Porreca originally got his bachelor's in general science from Villanova, and then he got his master's in biomedical engineering from Drexel University. And then it sounds like he had a change of career heart, so to speak, and ended up getting his PhD in pharmacology from Temple University in 1982. After that, he came here and has essentially been here ever since. Dr. Porreca studies many different facets of pain research, including origins of chronic pain, neurobiology of pathological pain states, migraine, cancer pain, neurobiology of opioids, among other things. And Dr. Porreca has received many awards for his research, including the Ronald Melzack Award from the International Association for the Study of Pain, as well as other awards from, it sounds like if there's a pain society out there, you name it. He's gotten awards from the American Pain Society, the Canadian Pain Society, the Australian Pain Society, the British Pain Society, and many more. So we are very honored to have him with us today to give his talk entitled Of Mice and Women, Bridging the Translational Divide to Understand Pain. So Dr. Porreca, thanks for joining us today. And the floor is yours.
It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we do in our laboratory, and also possibly to introduce myself. As Jennifer said, my background is a little bit different. I kind of was doing sort of engineering work, in a master's degree. And then sort of by accident, I bumped into someone who was doing a biology project that was a little bit quantitative, and they kind of invited me up to their laboratory, and I started kind of going there after class and, just fooling around. And before you knew it, I was doing something that was called pharmacology. So I can't actually claim that it was very well planned on my part. I just kind of drifted into it and kind of bumped into someone who was very influential in my life. And then started to guide me into studies that had to do with understanding the mechanisms of actions of opioids. Now, I want to step back and, a lot of what you take for granted today as common knowledge was not very common many years ago, and not even that many years ago. But at the time that I started researching the effects of opioids, the opioid receptor, the idea that there was an opioid receptor in the brain had just been discovered and published. And then just a few years after the discovery of the opioid receptor, there was a very influential paper that suggested that there were actually substances in our brains that could bind to these receptors. So we actually had endogenous opioids. I mean, that was really quite revolutionary. And so that really began the whole field of study of endogenous opioids and their receptors in the brain, and trying to understand what the physiological role of these endogenous peptides and their receptors were. And that discovery of endogenous opioids and their receptors, the neurobiology of opioids, really opened up the entire field of neuropeptides and their receptor functions in the brain. So that wasn't a field that existed really before those discoveries. Anyway, so I got into studying this in part because of this fascinating observation of endogenous opioids and their receptors, and their essential role in life. And then I realized that really what we were doing is understanding the brain and understanding essential functions of these circuits in the brain that had to do with opioid addiction and stress, and also pain, of course. And so that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our research in which we are trying to study pain. And you see from the title of my talk that I'm talking about mice, of course, and we study pain in a preclinical laboratory, but I'm emphasizing women. And that's because one of the things that we've learned most recently is that there's a quite remarkable difference mechanistically in the mechanisms that promote pain between the sexes. And so I'll try to tell you just a little bit about that. So let me just tell you how do I move forward here? Okay. Let me just tell you how we approach this. What we try to do in the laboratory is something that we refer to as clinically informed basic science. So what we're trying to do is to understand what happens in humans and then take it back to the laboratory, try to understand it mechanistically in order for us to help to develop discoveries that can help to create therapies. So we are not a pharmaceutical company. We don't make drugs, but we do work with pharmaceutical companies. We work with people that are creative in terms of biology, melding biology and chemistry to try and advance the development of new therapies. So what do we do in the lab? So I think the best way to capture this is something like this. We try to study mechanisms of pain and stress and addiction. And so these are circuits that exist in the brain that mediate these responses. And what we found is that these circuits are overlapping circuits. And so basically the circuits that are associated with pain and stress and addiction are circuits that overlap in terms of their receptors, in terms of their projections, in terms of the consequences of their activity, in terms of motivated behavior. And so what we try to do, the techniques that we use are behavioral assays. We use anatomy, immunohistochemistry, we use opto and chemogenetics. We've been using CRISPR gene editing and the approach is to identify cell-specific manipulations to help us to reveal the circuits and to reveal their effects on behavior and to help to reveal the presence of sex differences in these various fields. Now, I can't advance here. Okay. So I thought I'd just give you a quick highlight of some of the ongoing projects in the laboratory to give you a sense of this. So we have been studying brain circuits that are associated with the different dimensions of pain, and I'm going to say some more about that in just a couple of moments. And so this includes acute pain, chronic pain, and what we can refer to as functional pain, stress-related functional pain. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those kinds of pain in a couple of moments. And we focus on the amygdala, we focus on the cortex. We're looking at neurohormones that arise from the hypothalamus that are stress-related, that can promote sex differences in pain. And we're looking at the consequences of pain and addiction on sleep. So we're measuring sleep in animals. And we really, I'm not going to tell you much about this today, but it's an area that has really been very exciting for us because we've recognized that pain has influences on in disrupting sleep. But what's more interesting is that disruption of sleep promotes very significantly increased pain. And so these are things that are common to people all around the world. We've been studying cognition, the consequences of pain and addiction on cognitive function, and the impact of these conditions in terms of learning, memory. We study migraine, so preclinical studies of migraine that affects perhaps nearly 40 million people in the United States. And most recently, we've been studying post-traumatic headache. And so this is commonly, our interest in post-traumatic headache is in mild post-traumatic headache, something that you might read about as concussion. And of course, concussion is dramatically prevalent in our society. It's prevalent in sports, all kinds of sports, from the middle school up through professional sports. It's prevalent in the military. It's prevalent in older people with falls. And so this is a very, very important part of health-related disability in the United States. The most common consequence of a concussion is a headache. The headache can be acute, can last less than 3 months. It can be persistent, can last more than 3 months, and in some people never resolve and basically ruin people's lives. So, so this is what we do. Now, I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. I can't see everybody. I guess there's too many people to see on these thumbnails, but and it's Zoom, so if you'd like to ask a question or have a discussion, just unmute and speak. So I can catch you perhaps on the chat, but in case I don't see that, please just speak up. All right, so let me make a couple of comments about pain. So I've titled this slide that I think that pain is one of the greatest clinical challenges of our age. And I wanted to show you some data that supports this idea. These are data that were reported in 2015. They actually haven't changed very, very much. And this was a study in which the authors categorized pain by category. So category 1 pain is the least severe pain. Category 4 pain is the most severe pain. And then they did an assessment of the number of individuals, either millions of adults or percent of all adults, suffer from pain on some days or on most days or every single day. And what I want you to focus on is the number of individuals that suffer from pain every single day, from either category 4 pain or category 3 pain or even category 2 pain. And so if you add this up, you can see that there's a tremendous number of individuals in our society that have pain every single day. And so what this tells you is that whatever we have available to treat pain in these individuals is not working. So we don't have appropriate medications to treat pain to help these individuals. Now, so that is a tremendous burden on the lives and the quality of life of these individuals, and it's a tremendous burden in our society as well. And so I wanted to show you this. This is from an Institutes of Medicine report that was published in 2010. And it's not really changed very much since then. So they did an estimate of the number of individuals that suffer from pain in the United States, and they estimated as many as 1 in 3. Now, 1 in 3 people that suffer from chronic pain. Now, I think that that's an overestimate. It sort of depends on how you define pain, but everybody knows somebody in pain. And you can always think about somebody that has, for example, low back pain that's intermittent. You can think about people that have migraine. And so those fall into that category of 1 in 3 pain. But about 1 in 10, a more realistic estimate of truly chronic pain, these are the individuals that suffer from high impact pain. And so about 1 in 10 individuals really has pain that influences their entire quality of life, that prevents them from having any activities that are essential to their lives, work activities, education, enjoyment activities. So these are individuals that suffer from high impact pain. And so again, we don't really have medicines and approaches that can help those individuals. Now you see the economic cost, and I'm showing you these numbers not because so much about economics, but just to give you a sense of the scope of this, right? $635 billion per year in the United States on health-related costs related to pain. And I put some of these other estimates down from the same report. Cardiovascular disease. You hear quite a lot about cardiovascular disease. It's $309 billion. Neoplasms, injury, poisoning, endocrine and metabolic disorders such as diabetes and digestive diseases, respiratory diseases. You see that chronic pain is actually larger than almost all of these diseases and larger than many of these diseases combined. So pain is a big deal in our society, and it's a tremendous, it's tremendously important in getting our attention for us to understand what it is, how it occurs, and how we can help treat patients that suffer from all kinds of pain, but especially those patients that suffer from high impact pain. So I'm going to start off by asking you a couple of questions. I'd like you to jump in and tell me the answer. So the first question is, why do we have pain? Does anybody have any ideas on this?
Pain tells us when something's going wrong.
Something's going wrong? Yeah. I think you're muted again. Yeah, the most common words in 2020, maybe, right? You're on mute. Any other ideas when something's going wrong?
I think
Anybody
also
else?
when we get older, we develop like osteoporosis. Our body isn't what it used to be. So our body kind of tells us that it's not as good as it used to be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me give you a quick overview. I've got some pictures here of Arizona. You're all living in Arizona, so you know that there are some issues related to Arizona, especially with the sun. We enjoy 300 days of sunshine a year, but we also know if we're out in the sun a little bit too long, that can create a problem. So what I'm showing you here is some local inflammation that comes with a sunburn. But what I wanted to point out with this is that I think everybody's experienced a sunburn of some sort. You see the T-shirt can actually produce pain. And so what that's telling you is that something that doesn't normally hurt now can produce pain. And so it is giving us a warning of tissue damage that's occurring. So that's one fact. In northern Arizona, of course, we can have winters, and the winters can result in damage, frostbite, for example. We've seen this. So we can have these mechanical stimuli that can produce pain. And of course, there are these creatures in the desert that have these chemical stimuli. And so why do we have pain? Well, I'm going to give you the answer that occurs to most people. It's a warning. It's a warning against tissue damage of some noxious stimuli, a stimulus that can produce damage to tissues that can come from heat or cold, from mechanical stimulation, or from chemical stimulation. So does that make sense to everybody? It should. But I want to tell you something else about pain that is really the most important part about pain. Pain does all of these things. It gives us a warning that we've just been injured, but it does something else that's really very, very important. And that is this. Pain is a sensory experience. It's a sensation, but unlike other sensations that are affectively neutral, pain is always unpleasant. So pain is unpleasant at threshold, and it is the unpleasantness of pain that is essential for our survival. So pain is a physiological response that promotes learning. That is actually the most important part about pain. So once you're out in the sun too long, you know that you shouldn't be out in the sun again next time. So it helps us to make decisions in the future that protect us against against things that could produce damage to our tissues. Another thing about pain is that pain is associated with action. Pain demands a behavioral response. And so if you have pain, you have motivation to escape and to seek relief from that unpleasantness of pain. Any questions about that? Any comments? No? I can see some people making comments. Okay, so let me go on. So the next question I have for you is, where is pain? Now this you should have some comments on, I would think.
Pain can be either in your neurons, like in your brain, but also like your local ones, like in your muscles and stuff, in your nerves. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a good answer. So the question is kind of a funny one, isn't it? Because where is pain? And I wanted to show you this little picture of a little boy that was from in an article called "The Treatise of Man" by René Descartes, who was quite a famous philosopher, and some of you may have taken philosophy courses. And this was back in the 1596 to 1650 period, so a very, very, very early stage of scientific inquiry. And what was interesting about this is that until the time of Descartes, people never really understood that pain had to do with the body. So in those times, pain was thought to be something that was suffering that was imposed by God to create suffering for sins that were associated with humans. And what Descartes did is he localized pain to the body. And he drew this little picture where he had this fire, where he said the particles from the fire jump across to the foot, and they activate a hollow tube that contains animal spirits that rings a bell in the brain. Okay, now if you think about what he said and put it into modern terms, you can see how advanced his thinking was. The fire is something in modern terms that we would call a noxious stimulus. There's something in the foot that receives the particles from the fire, and we could call that a pain receptor. And then it activates this hollow tube that essentially pulls a string. This is perhaps an ascending pain transmission fiber, ascending pain transmission neural mechanisms that rings a bell, activates a specific area of the brain that ultimately results in evaluation and perception. And so what is clear from this drawing is that the activation of the pain receptor in the foot results in evaluation and perception in the brain. And so you can also see the little boy turning towards the fire. Okay, so what this is telling us is that pain is not in the foot. Pain is never in the foot. Pain is always in the brain, in perception. And pain demands a behavioral response. So you see the little boy turning towards the fire, because now there's a cognitive process that's being engaged to determine, what do I do? Do I pull my foot away? Do I rub my foot? Do I escape? Is it something other than a fire? What would be the behavioral decision that would go with that? So this is a process that we always get confused in when we discuss pain. People talk about pain in their finger, in their toes. And pain is always in the brain, and that's something that we can now understand at a more modern level of neuroscience, where we have specific fiber types that are important for detecting these types of stimuli. These are called nociceptors. They respond to high-intensity stimuli, but not low-intensity stimuli. They're pseudo-unipolar cells. You can see them here. They project to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. They activate these second-order cells, and they're different from these myelinated fibers that mediate touch responses. They produce ascending pain transmission to different parts of the brain, to the thalamus, and to the sensory cortex, and to the an area of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, where you have this perception of the aversive qualities of pain. So the next question that I have is, well, what is pain? And I think, am I running out of time already, Jennifer?
You're about 5 minutes off. We can give you a few more beyond that.
Okay. Well, then let me go a little bit quicker here, because it turns out that this I didn't realize it would take this much time. So there's a definition. Pain is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience which we primarily associate with tissue damage, or describe in terms of tissue damage, or both. And so it's easy for us to understand pain. Here's a picture of somebody who has an injury. That individual should have pain. Everybody agree? Here's another injury, this a little boy that has an injury. So when you look at these, which individual has more pain? Any guesses? Which one?
The one with the gash?
The one with the gash, that's what everybody would think. But you see, this individual is quite happy. So maybe he got this gash, snowboarding or skiing or something like that. And he's, conquered some hill he wanted to go over. And so he's happy. This little boy is responding to the pain in a different way. And so I wanted to show you this. This was Dr. Henry Beecher. He was a lieutenant colonel back in the Second World War at the treating soldiers at the Anzio beachhead. And I'm going to read you this quote here. He writes, there's a common belief that wounds are inevitably associated with pain, and further, that the more extensive wound, the worse the pain. He says, observation of freshly wounded men in the combat zone show that this generalization is misleading. If one may speak of such a subjective experience as pain in general, in exact terms, the generalization can be said to hold in only 1/4 of severely wounded men. It fails in the remaining 3/4. And this was important because Beecher was an anesthesiologist, and the first thing that people would do is give morphine to all injured individuals. And that had severe cardiovascular effects. And his point was that these individuals may not have needed that sort of treatment. And so the message here is this: there's no simple relationship between the stimulus and the subjective response to pain, because pain is fundamentally a subjective experience. And it depends on the context in which the pain occurs. This guy's happy, this person's not so happy. And then there are some people that have pain that don't have any injury at all. Can anybody think about the types of situations in which there's pain without injury?
Fibromyalgia.
Yep, fibromyalgia is a great example.
Arthritis.
Arthritis might have actual injuries, so that maybe not. Any others?
Migraines, headaches.
Migraine, absolutely. Migraine, temporomandibular joint disorder, irritable bowel syndrome, all of those might be considered the functional pain without injury. And so this is the way that we now start to understand it. These were two individuals that were influential in our field from a long time ago. They developed something called the gait theory, which you may read about. And I don't really have time to tell you all about this, but what they describe is that a gate in the spinal cord that allows messages to be admitted to the brain so that the brain can then determine the appropriate course of action. And so the brain determines the messages that are admitted to conscious response. And we can think about this as a mechanism of endogenous analgesia. And so what Dr. Melzek wrote is that stimulation produces neural signals which enter an active nervous system, which is already the substrate of past experience and culture and anxiety and so forth. And so the bottom line is that you never have pain in the absence of previous information. You have always previous experience to draw upon. You have the stimulation of this noxious fiber. And what happens is the brain interprets this. Is there a threat? How much of a threat? What should I do? And you draw upon past experience to determine what the appropriate behavior should be. And so the experience of pain determines on the state of the individual, the emotional state of the individuals, whether you're focused on the pain or distracted, your expectation of how intense the pain should be, the stress level that is associated with you. And so there's actually a descending pathway from the brain to the spinal cord that can actually inhibit the transmission of these noxious signals. So descending pain inhibition, and this descending pathway can either inhibit pain or facilitate pain, depending upon the context in which the nociceptors are activated. So if you're in a circumstance in which it's advantageous to suppress the pain and do something else, like get a reward, like if you're an animal, you're hungry, maybe you have to tolerate the pain in order to get food and to survive, then you activate descending inhibition, you suppress the pain and do something more important. You survive to escape. Or if you're in a hospital and like the men in Dr. Beecher's setting, they were in battle, survival was more important than responding to pain. But on the other hand, if you're in a hospital and as a civilian, that injury would be very debilitating. You respond to the pain, you complain about the pain, and you experience the pain. So that's descending pain facilitation. So context, past experience, interpretation, all determine the most advantageous decision for behaviors that benefit the organism. And so again, pain is a call to action. This is the last thing I'm going to tell you, then I'll end, Jennifer. I'm sorry if I'm running too long. What we've understood is that there are differences, there are sex differences in pain. And so in 2009, the International Association for the Study of Pain declared the Global Year Against Pain in Women. And they stated that chronic pain affects a higher proportion of women than men worldwide, and yet women are less likely to receive treatment. That women tend to have more recurrent, severe, and long-lasting pain than men, and that there are many pain conditions that are far more prevalent in women than in men. And at that time, they stated that women's pain has a significant global impact, but a lack of awareness and recognition persists. And so what I'm showing you here is the sex ratio, the prevalence of these different types of pain. Musculoskeletal pain, you can see that women show a slightly higher prevalence. Orofacial pain, migraine, fibromyalgia, almost exclusively a female disease, and irritable bowel syndrome. And what we now understand is that most of the pain syndromes in which there's a female prevalence are what we call functional pain syndromes. Again, those pain syndromes in which there is pain but no tissue injury. 3-to-1 female to male in migraine, 9-to-1 female to male in fibromyalgia, 3-to-1 in IBS, 5-to-1 in temporomandibular dysfunction. Very, very few disorders are male prevalent. And so we don't really understand this. And what we really have been trying to understand is why essentially the great majority of chronic pain patients in the world are women. So if you are female, you have a greater risk of becoming a chronic pain patient. And so we need to understand the reasons for this and the underlying biology of this. This is one of the syndromes in which males have a greater prevalence, cluster headache, a trigeminal autonomic cephalalgia. So all of these are different syndromes. They have different biology. But one thing that is common is that there are triggering events, including stress. Women have greater stress responses than men, and that's based on objective measurements of cortisol responses. And the other point is that these functional pain syndromes often reduce with advancing age, and so there's a suggestion that there's a contribution of sex hormones. And the ones that you would think about, obviously, estrogen is important, but there are other hormones that are related to estrogen, including one that we've been studying quite a lot lately called prolactin. And prolactin is involved in production of milk. That's what it was named for. But like so many things that we study in biology, it was named for one thing. And then as we study it, we realize it does many other things. And so prolactin has more than 300 identified biological functions beyond its physiological role in milk production. And it seems to produce an increase in sensitivity to pain selectively in females, in female animals, and we think is selectively in women as well. So Jennifer, I could go on, obviously, but I'm very sorry. I think I've just gone too long. I mistimed my presentation here.
Well, thank you for that information, Dr. Porreca. Can I share your email address with everyone in case they want to follow up with you?
Yes, absolutely. So let me just add one more thing. Our laboratory has participated in the UBRP program for many years. We've had many, many UBRP students. I don't know exactly how many, Jennifer. I think we have 3 or 4 in the lab right now, actually.
They have quite a few now.
Yeah, and they are all participating in some of the projects that I showed you. I think we just had a lab meeting, and I asked them to give a little report on what they were doing. Everybody seems to be doing very well, very enthusiastic and learning. If you're interested in this area at all, please contact me. You have my email, and I'd be happy to tell you more about any of this aspect. So thank you, Jennifer.
So Dr. Porreca, thanks for being here today. We appreciate it.
Okay, thanks everybody.